Before we begin today's topic, let us briefly recall what we discussed in the previous lecture: the nationalist approach and its contribution to Indian historiography. Nationalist historians played a crucial role in countering colonial misinterpretations. They restored confidence in India's past, emphasized indigenous achievements, and challenged the idea that Indian civilization was stagnant or inferior. However, despite these strengths, the nationalist approach largely remained within the political framework of history, focusing on rulers, resistance, and state power. Today's topic emerges as a natural intellectual progression from this limitation. When historians realized that political narratives alone cannot explain the complexity of ancient Indian society, a new direction in historical writing began to take shape, what we call the move towards non-political history. The term non-political history does not mean the absence of politics. Rather, it means that politics is no longer the sole or dominant lens through which the past is studied. This approach shifts attention from kings, dynasties, and wars to society, economy, culture, religion, and the lives of ordinary people. It asks fundamentally different questions. How did people earn their livelihood? How were villages organized? What role did religion play in everyday life? How did social hierarchies function on the ground? In simple terms, non-political history attempts to reconstruct the total life of the past, not merely the actions of political elites. The dominance of political history created a narrow and selective narrative. Political sources, such as inscriptions and chronicles, were mostly commissioned by rulers. Naturally, they glorified victories, ignored failures, and remained silent on social inequalities. More importantly, large sections of ancient Indian history, especially prehistoric and proto-historic periods like the Harappan civilization, cannot be explained through political categories at all. There are no clear kings, dynasties, or empires in the archaeological record. This forced historians to rethink their methods. To understand such societies, they had to rely on material culture, settlement patterns, economic activities, and belief systems, all of which lie outside traditional political history. The move towards non-political history did not happen in isolation. It was closely linked to changes in the global intellectual climate of the 20th century. History as a discipline began interacting deeply with other social sciences. Earlier, historians worked largely as chroniclers of political events. Now, they began to function as social analysts. Influences from anthropology, sociology, economics, and human geography encouraged historians to ask structural questions rather than narrative ones. This marked a crucial transformation from what happened to why societies function the way they did. Indian historiography absorbed this shift gradually, especially after the limitations of nationalist political history became evident. Anthropology played a particularly important role in reshaping ancient Indian history. Anthropologists study living societies, especially tribal and rural communities, to understand kinship, customs, rituals, and social organization. Historians began using anthropological insights to interpret ancient societies. For example, present-day tribal practices help scholars understand prehistoric cultures, megalithic burials, and early religious beliefs. Similarly, sociology helps historians analyze caste structures, social stratification, and institutionalized inequality. Instead of treating caste as a static textual category, it was now examined as a dynamic social reality, varying across regions and periods. Among all disciplines, archaeology proved to be the most decisive force behind non-political history. Archaeology provided direct evidence of how people lived, what they ate, where they lived, what tools they used, and how settlements were organized. For prehistoric and proto-historic India, archaeology is not supplementary. It is the primary source of history. Even for historical periods, archaeological data often corrects or challenges textual claims. By focusing on houses instead of palaces, tools instead of crowns, and settlements instead of capitals, archaeology shifted historical attention decisively toward everyday life and long-term social processes. At the heart of the move towards non-political history lies social history. Social history shifts the focus of historical inquiry from the actions of rulers to the lived experiences of ordinary people. Instead of asking how empires expanded, social history asks how society was structured, how families functioned, how communities were organized, and how social norms were maintained or challenged. This approach recognizes that the majority of people in ancient India were peasants, artisans, laborers, monks, and women whose lives were rarely recorded in political texts but whose collective action sustained civilization. Ancient Indian texts, such as the Dharmashastras, present an idealized social order, often rigid and hierarchical. However, non-political history cautions us against treating these texts as direct reflections of reality. By combining textual references with archaeological and anthropological evidence, historians discovered that social practices were far more flexible. Occupational mobility, regional variation, and local customs often modified or even contradicted textual prescriptions. Thus, social history bridges the gap between normative ideals and actual social practice, allowing a more realistic reconstruction of ancient society.